During the wedding, priest notices something weird about bride and angrily stops everything. It was the kind of sunny, gorgeous day that was ideal for a wedding, and everyone was ready to have a blast. But when the priest stopped everything after taking one look at the bride, everything changed drastically. You'll be shocked to hear the reason. The groom's friends and relatives were swarming the church. The security personnel were working very hard to clear the road and direct the cars into the parking lot, since there was a lengthy queue of cars waiting to be parked in front of the church. The priest, Fabian, was inside the church getting ready for the awaiting ceremony. Just the way Fabian wanted it, the bride and groom, Lily and Derek, showed up within minutes of one another. When the bride and groom arrived late for their own wedding, it irritated him. Soon later, the bride was ready to go down the aisle as the wedding ceremony started. With a silly smile on his face, Derek stood at the altar, constantly attempting to iron his shirt so he would look flawless on his special day. Lily, meanwhile, was wearing the most stunning wedding gown anyone had ever seen and was awaiting at the church entrance with a bouquet in her hand. She stood at the entrance by herself, a veil drawn over her face. Fabian was aware that she would walk down the aisle by herself. When he last spoke with Lily, she informed him that her father was running late and that he was the only person who truly cared enough to accompany her down the aisle. Fabian seemed to accept her decision to walk by herself. The music soon started and the bride took her time walking while holding her bouquet. Derek flinched more and more as she got closer and closer. As the congregation joined in with the choir, Fabian remained composed and continued singing until Lily eventually made it to the altar. She stopped next to Derek, who was smiling at her and was charmed with her. At last, Fabian opened his arms and asked Derek to present his bride so the vows could be exchanged. The young man smiled and nervously reached out to take off Lily's veil so that everyone could see her gorgeous face. Fabian looked at Lily and yelled in pain almost instantly. It felt like the first time he had ever laid eyes on her. His head hurt so badly that he grabbed it and tripped backwards, almost hitting the ground. Everyone in the church let out a quiet gasp at that moment, wondering what was wrong with the priest. The altar staff rushed to Fabian's side and offered to help, but he told them to leave and said he was fine. He tried to get up on his own, but his legs gave way under his weight and he fell again. As they feared he might pass out, the attendants asked that someone get him water. Finally, Fabian let them lead him to his chair. Derek and Lily were left standing at the altar, looking like they had no idea what's going on. The water calmed him. When he was feeling better, he slowly got up and went back up to the couple who was still waiting to get married. He stopped next to them and glared. Everyone could see that he was very angry. He went on to say that the wedding should be stopped right away. A new scream of shock went through the crowd. Derek stared blankly at the priest as if horns had popped out from nowhere on his head. He couldn't understand why someone would make such a terrible decision. Then he asked Fabian why he was ruining this special day in that way. Right now, the priest told him, he had to think about the vision he had just seen. At this point, everyone jumped to their feet, ready for whatever was going to happen next. No one was surprised that Fabian could see past the material world. Fabian was a famous priest who fought demons and set souls free who were being held captive by bad spirits. He could often just see them once he set eyes on them. They were all marked in a way that made them different from other people. He saw things, but some people were strong enough to hide or even run away from that. Fabian had just seen many different kinds of visions as a priest, which made him understand that the world was full of dangers. People need to be very careful. As he had been moved to this church a few years before, he chose to hide his name because it was a pretty small town. As he got older, he chose to stop traveling so much and let the next generation take over. He chose to be in charge of the spiritual health of his host town and church while he was away. He got rid of all the evil spirits that were making the kids in the town sick and kept them back as soon as he got there. Through everything he did, he won over so many hearts. And because they all believed what he said, they clung to his words like they were the gospel itself. Because of this, when he said he had seen a vision, everyone in the crowd stood up and got ready to act. They knew that either the bride or the groom's spiritual problem would be fixed. Fabian took the microphone and began speaking into it. His story was that he had had doubts about Lily ever since Derek brought her to the marriage therapy for their first time. Even though it seemed clear, he couldn't place how familiar she was. He even asked the cops to help him with his investigation and tried to figure out where they all crossed paths, but it didn't work. His search for her turned up nothing after he decided she was just someone who looked a lot like someone else. Derek refused to accept this. There was no way he could have known Lily before, he assured Fabian. Besides, she would have remembered him, even if he didn't remember Lily, but she didn't know who he was. Derek was upset that his wedding was being ruined since he was positive the priest was wrong. In order for them to exchange vows, he pleaded that they carry out the ceremony. Fabian gave a headshake. He turned to Lily and told her that before he could continue with the wedding ceremony, he needed her confirmation of something. He stated he had to examine something on her back, but the wedding dress she was wearing fully hid her from neck down to her ankles. She could not possibly turn to face him if he asked her to. Shaking her head, she attempted to walk away, but Fabian ordered the congregation to hold her back. Fabian then told her he needed to check something before she could leave. He said what she was looking for was right behind her shoulder. She didn't need to take her clothes off or help him with anything. Because she was so strongly turned down, the guests became split. Some people couldn't quite figure out what Fabian was looking for. Of all their plans, Derek and Lily came to the church to get married, but it looks like Fabian had other ideas. The other people replied that Fabian had never lied about anything. If he said there was something fishy about Lily, they were willing to bet that she had some kind of problem. Next, they told all of the times he made predictions that came true and freed souls that were being possessed. As time went on, more and more people asked Lily to just do what he said. The priest then called 5 women from the church to join them. He was sure that they would be fair to him. Then he asked them to bring Lily into his office so he could look at her back for any marks. Lily wouldn't change her mind, and she even said she would end the marriage if they went through with their plan. But the other women didn't seem to care. The woman walked with her to the office and stayed with her there. She called the women who wanted to look at the top of her back for marks names, and everyone could hear her yelling from outside. The office went quiet after a while, and there were no more sounds. It looked like they were able to keep Lily quiet. In a flash, the door opened, and the woman left Lily in the office before leaving. Fabian looked at them eagerly and asked if they had found any marks. They gave him a nod and told him that they had found a hook sign burnt into her skin. It was all Fabian needed to hear. He went into the office and shut the door right away after dropping his microphone. It wasn't long before they heard voices rising again. Fabian was yelling, begging, and calling on the guardians of heaven. Lily was mad at herself and saying things that no one could understand. As the people heard, their hearts beat fast with fear. It was clear to them that Fabian was protecting Lily from a spirit, and Derek's heart got weaker with every cry Lily made. Lily stopped screaming altogether in the end and started making more animal sounds. That was when she would roar like a lion and shake the church windows. Other times, she would bark like a dog and make a lot of noise. They could hear chains and tables being slammed into walls in the middle of all this noise. Lily sounded like she was running away. Lily finally meowed one last time, sounding like a scared cat. Over time, Fabian's prayers got slower and slower until his voice would barely make noise and his words would be hard to understand. It went on for a long while before the church finally fell silent again. Everybody looked at the office door, not sure what to make of what happened. Based on the noises they heard, they thought something bad had happened to their priest. It's possible that he got beat by someone bigger in the end. In this case, there was the first spiritual fight that shook the church as a whole. As the quiet grew and the door stayed shut, everyone looked at each other, not sure if they should go check on Lily and the priest. Derek was so worried that he couldn't do anything but stare at the closed door. Even though it was hard for him, he pushed himself to stay still. Because of what he had heard earlier, he knew that his fiancée wasn't as stupid as people had led him to think, but he couldn't stay still for long. Just as he was about to walk up to the door, the knob clicked and the door opened to show the priest. When Fabian left his office, he looked like he was 10 years older than he really was. He made it to his seat and threw himself into it, even though he was swaying. His whole body was covered in beads of sweat that were falling off him and onto the floor. But when people in the church saw him, they began to cheer. Being able to stand on his own 2 legs was what made him a winner. As soon as the church's cheers calmed down, he picked up his microphone and began to talk. He told them that he met Lily in a different city 5 years before. Back then, she was also getting married to a young man in this church. Even back then, when he didn't know anything about her, he felt something. He could never quite figure out why every time he saw her, he felt something was off. One time he saw her, but it only showed that she had a mark on her back. Since the mark looked like both a 6 and a hook at the same time, it had to be either one or the other. He thought something was wrong with his eyes, but there wasn't enough proof to confirm his doubts. In the end, he officiated her wedding and felt terrible about it because he couldn't stop her from getting married out of pure emotion. Lily killed her husband with a knife right before they were going to get married, and then she disappeared. People tried to find her but couldn't because she ran away. Fabian blamed himself for everything. He wanted to be moved from his old church to this new one because he couldn't find peace there because of how bad his mistake made him feel. When Derek told him she was his wife, he was very close to making the same mistake. During their marriage therapy, he had a strange feeling about Lily. It was like she was hiding something from him, but he couldn't put his finger on it. In addition to the fact that she didn't look like anyone he knew, he also had trouble remembering her during the marriage clause because he couldn't even picture her face. As before, he couldn't do anything because he didn't have any proof against her. He finally lost it when he saw her in a wedding dress. When Lily's veil was lifted, Fabian thought of the guy who had done the same thing 5 years before. At that very moment, it was like his eyes opened wide, letting him see Lily for who she really was. Right away, he had a vision of her killing Derek that night. Because of this, he stopped the wedding right away and beat the bad forces. As Fabian finished his speech, everyone in the room went quiet to think about how strong Lily had been and how close she had been to ending Derek's young life. The door opened at that very moment and Lily came out. It looked like she was weak and she was sweating more than Fabian. During the few minutes that she and Fabian had fought, she seemed to have lost a lot of weight and her face looked old. Derek jumped back in shock as he leaned against the wall and moved closer. She told him she was in a fraternal order at that time. Her real name was Lilith, not Lily. The goal of the social organization was to get as much money and power as possible by getting men to marry them so they could kill their husbands on the night of the wedding. The blood gave the person who got to kill them a lot of power, especially on the night of the wedding. Lilith said she was going for the ultimate number, 666, since she had already killed at least 665 men. In that case, killing Derek would have made her the fraternal ruler, giving her a lot of power. She then said that Fabian hadn't seen her at first because she was wearing a spiritual mask over her face. This kept him from seeing what she was doing, even though she looked familiar. But she was wrong about how strong he was, and he was able to see through her mask in the end. This led to a fierce fight in which she lost all her powers. By the time she was done talking, she was getting thinner and smaller, and her legs were folding under her. Giving birth to 2 bloody coughs, she rolled her eyes back in her head, and then she died on the ground. An audible gasp was let out as everyone saw the scary scene unfolding in front of them. It had shocked them that something like that could happen at a wedding. When Derek realized that the woman he loved was such a witch who had been planning to kill him after they got married, he looked confused. like he didn't know what was going on. Tears filled his eyes. Fabian said that Lilith's body shouldn't be left outside for a long time because of the evil forces that lived there, and that she should be buried right away. He prayed over her body one last time to try to save her soul before it was taken away to be buried. So, the event that was meant to be a wedding turned into a funeral. Derek's family and friends, on the other hand, were happy for the priest because he saw something they hadn't and saved Derek's life. Derek agreed that he would participate in church events more and help out with fighting evil in the way he could. Derek told Fabian that he owed him his life and thanked him for giving him another chance. What an exciting story. Who would have thought that Fabian would save Derek's life in that way? What do you think about the story? Let us know in the comment section below.